Elder Race, Part 5. The Reclamation.
Carlos. 40 years after the Karak incident. Troop ship, remember Shanghai. Approx. 1,000 kilometers from the new relay to Andorran space. Awaiting orders.
Oi, squish over, will ya?
Terry complained, trying to shove Carlos's wayward elbows away from his tray.
You may be the big bad new kid with the legendary final test, but we still follow the laws of common decency around here.
Sorry.
Carlos grinned back sheepishly.
It's just there's not a whole lot of room, you know?
Yeah, I hear ya.
Terry said, surveying the cramped mess hall. Numbers had been building steadily over the last few weeks as the houses began to cram the troop ships with as many as they could, and rumor had it that the reclamation was about to begin soon. Carlos tried not to let his cat-like grin show to anyone around him as he thought about the upcoming battles. There would be battles, of that there was no mistake. Even with the prattle those peace-loving Lins were espousing, there was just no other way. He began to shovel the food on his tray into his face as only soldiers can do, with reckless abandon and barely pausing to savor the taste. That way that same soldier saved himself from the rancid flavor of long-term nutrition gruel. But it was what they'd been raised on, and it was all they'd ever known, so it never occurred to Carlos, or anyone else in the new generation Marine Corps, known affectionately as Killer Tots, KTS, to complain. Why complain if you can't get better? The gruel they were eating was highly nutritious, and served to provide every vitamin and mineral that the legion of young fighters would ever need. It was cheap and easy to mass produce, but as it goes with things that shared the same qualities, it tasted like, and had the consistency of boiled toilet paper mushed up in a ball.
When do you think we'll make the drop?
Rox asked ponderingly, as he scratched at the pockmarks on his thin and sallow face. Everything Rox ever did was in a pondering fashion. Rather than make the decision and then do the action, Rox appeared to begin the action as he thought, and finally made a decision after he had done it.
I dunno, Rox, but it better be soon. I can only take so much more of living under everyone's armpits like this.
Terry grumbled back. He was about to say more, but he suddenly stood up rigidly and stared open-mouthed. Carlos looked up at him in consternation.
Terry, you already.
Terry slapped Carlos lightly on the face and hissed.
Shut up, you fuckwit! Blue bloods!
Carlos leaped to his feet as well, and craned his neck to see over everyone else who had stopped to do the same thing. Blue bloods, humans who had been born naturally before the enactment of Protocol 223, were very rare indeed. Essentially royalty, they inhabited a strange unofficial stratum of human society sitting just above the new generations, those essentially grown like crops under the dictates of the protocol. Some said that they had an implant that meant that they could live forever. Others said that they were an entirely different species. All Carlos knew was that the ones he saw looked like they were made of stone and ice as they marched through the mess hall, the blue armbands catching the eyes of everyone as they passed. They never once looked directly at the mass of curious KTs that watched them, transfixed. They were gazing off into some unknown place where KTs couldn't go. They think they're better than us, Carlos growled in his head, surprised at his unexpected feelings of hatred and shame. He'd show them. He'd show them all. Everyone came back to life as the blue bloods left the mess hall. Carlos and Terry both sat back down, somehow exhausted. Rock hadn't gotten up at all and had stolen some of Terry's gruel while they'd been busy staring. The immediate bickering that began between the two gave Carlos the time to ponder his rush of feeling. He'd never been what anyone would call an emotional person. His interactions with other troops and his thinking process, up until this point, had been remarkable in their cold and logical methodology, in which Carlos decided whether the person he spoke to was worth more alive or dead. Terry and Rock were the closest thing to friends he'd ever had, and he felt strangely protective of them. And yet, he felt this strange hatred flow through him at the sight of the blue bloods looking down their noses. We're all human here.
All units to battle stations. I repeat, all units to battle stations.
Food forgotten, every single KT stood rigidly at attention before saluting. Whilst they had been casually socializing before, there were now machines that moved with precise turns and thumping steps. Get your battle armor on, Carlos thought to himself in a mantra-like fashion. Get your battle armor on, and you'll be fine. See then. Scout ship Monkey King. Andorran militarized zone. Shilin had been the first through the relay in a tiny cloaked scout ship, and her eyes had bulged with what she had seen. Planet crackers. Hundreds of them. All were arranged so that they would be covering each other. Shilin knew that given time, humanity could overcome this obstacle like any other that had been placed before them, but not without enormous cost. She could hardly believe it, but the client races had done it. They had built something that may just keep humanity out. This convinced her that resuming their place as masters of the Orion Spur was an outdated concept. They needed to adapt. They had been left in their suspension chambers for too long, and the rest of the galaxy had advanced too far for them to take control peaceably. Too far for them to take control at all. This was a problem that could only be solved with careful diplomatic tweaking, and even then it was unlikely. The sad fact of the matter was that humanity was most likely the galaxy's boogeyman, and would remain so for centuries. Those poor mistaken fools. They didn't know what else was out there. Shilin called the board. There was a meeting in session awaiting the go-ahead, and she was the designated forward representative, tasked with considering the strategic implications of the attack firsthand.
There is something I believe the board should see.
Shilin began, speaking clearly towards the holovid that displayed her position on the board table. She quickly patched in the vid feed from outside the ship, showing the vast array of enemy emplacements that the human race was to overcome if they were to emerge supreme. There were gasps of surprise, perhaps some even going so far as to let their despair show to the other board members. That was unwise, Shilin thought. That's like dripping your own blood into a pool full of sharks.
Impossible.
Alexei spluttered.
How could they have the resources to build something of this magnitude?
We have underestimated our clients, fellow members of the board.
She then explained.
We have been operating under the assumption that they would just roll over and submit like dogs. We forgot that they came from us. They will not give up so easily, and they will make us bleed for it. I know that I have said this many times, and I will say it again. We need to explore diplomatic options. The galaxy has moved on without us. The original plan has failed. We need to adapt.
There was silence, as everyone mulled it over. A voice spoke up from one of the lesser houses. Shilin believed his name to be Frederick.
How can we be sure that this will work? They are unlikely to trust us since the regrettable altercations between the Winchesters and the Karak. If they are as savvy as you believe, we will just be warning them of our intentions. We will give up what advantage of surprise we may have.
At least they were considering it, Shilin conceded to herself. Perhaps they could be convinced.
We don't have an advantage. They're ready for us at the only point that we can reach them. There's no way around it. Our only option to avoid the deaths of millions of our own is to negotiate. We must enter the galactic scene once again as allies and equals, rather than masters. It's too late for the old plan.
What happened to the Shilin of old?
Rumbled Androm Winchester, his piercing blue eyes clouded with disapproval and disdain.
What happened to the warrior princess I used to know? Instead, before me, I see a mewling little girl. We have come this far to our goal. You are asking these fine members of the board to give up on their long-term investments in the face of a little bit of blood.
Shilin grimaced. Androm was appealing to the board's self-interest. It was obvious what he wanted. The Winchesters had been crippled by the Karak incident after the board had stripped them of what usable space they had taken in the interest of humanity as a whole. He needed to show the board how powerful Winchester House had become, but Shilin knew that the greater good was what mattered here. And although Androm's words had swayed a great many members towards immediate assault, the vast majority favored a more deliberate approach.
The motion carries. Shilin, you will immediately travel to these planet crackers and attempt to negotiate with our clients on behalf of the board and the human race. The rest of the fleet will wait on standby should negotiations fail. I must commend Shilin on her bravery, as there is no guarantee that she will ever return.
Alexei intoned. Shilin nodded, pleased with the outcome. Her life in exchange for millions, possibly billions. This was a gamble that she would happily make. Androm Winchester. Supercarrier Leviathan. Reclamation Armada. 1,000 kilometers from the new relay to the Andorran militarized zone. This was unacceptable. Completely and utterly unacceptable. They were tainted, all of them. It was the only explanation. The board was weak, and there was only one thing on Androm's mind as he stalked back towards his offices. The calamity isn't over. It was clear to him now. Oh, so clear. His mind dripped with venom as he considered the implications. This meant that every blue blood but him could be compromised. Compromised by the great enemy. The only ones he could rely on were the new generations, the ones who'd never been exposed to the twisted atrocities that were the hallmark of the Calamity years. He needed them more than ever. He was so glad that he had defied the board and maintained secret training facilities to grow more recruits. They were pure, untainted. They were the future. And the board. Well, the board was a part of the past. Androm keyed into his intercom.
Get me 100 of your most loyal KTs.
He snapped, not even waiting for a reply. He quickly crossed to his personal armory and extracted his favorite weapon. It was the R-22 concussive pistol. A shot from this to the abdomen meant instant and messy death. He checked the magazine before whacking the slide and shoving it into the concealed pocket in his jacket.
Sir.
Androm looked up and smiled as his adjutant stood at his door, body held rigidly at attention.
Sir, the KTs are here in full kit.
Excellent. Androm nodded in recognition, but inside he was dancing for joy. Soon he would avenge the fall of his family and finally put the calamity to an end. Finally, a glorious age of peace and prosperity for humankind would be ushered in and washed clean with the blood of the past. Alexei Kirchenko. Boardroom Supercarrier Leviathan. Reclamation Armada. 1,000 kilometers from the new relay to Andorran militarized space. Alexei sat down with his fellow board members, wondering idly why young Winchester had called an emergency meeting at this juncture. It had literally been half an hour since the last one, and the only reason that it could be reconvened so quickly was because no one had had the time to move too far from the boardroom yet. Yishilin would be proceeding with considerable caution in an effort to sneak past the planet crackers and locate the leaders of the client races. They didn't expect to hear from her for days at least. Alexei was very interested to know the reason for this session. Androm entered through one of the many doors that allowed entrance to the boardroom from every direction. His face was quite steely and Alexei found himself silent out of consternation. What could have possibly brought about that sort of expression? It was most certainly bad news. Nothing could have gone wrong at this early stage, surely. Alexei was saved from speaking by one of the more impatient board members, one Frederick von Einsbern.
I say, Androm, what's the meaning of this?
Androm fixed Frederick von Einsbern with an icy stare. Something in Alexei recoiled away from the man's face. Something said that it wasn't right. Alexei stared intently at Androm, trying to put his finger on what was making him uncomfortable, and there it was. For the tiniest of instances, Androm's eyes flashed yellow. What? Alexei shook his head slightly and leaned forward as the chilly exchange continued. Other members were beginning to shift uncomfortably as Androm continued to stand, still as a statue, glaring at Frederick with a coldness that came from the tundra. No. Alexei noticed a slight discoloration of the veins around Androm's neck. They were dark and bruised and showed up stark against his skin. It can't be. There it was again. That yellow flash. Androm was fighting something deep inside him. Taint. Alexei immediately stood up and jumped the table, sprinting towards Androm with no thoughts of his own safety. They had fought the calamity over. They were wrong. Before Alexei could reach Androm, he'd drawn his pistol from his coat and calmly shot Frederick center mass. He exploded in blood and gore, painting all those near him with his guts. KTS stormed the room, firing indiscriminately into the members of the board, forcing bodies to grotesquely dance as they were violently shredded away. Alexei slammed into Androm and attempted to wrest the pistol from his grasp.
Androm, fight it, fight it!
Alexei screamed into his face.
This isn't you. It isn't too late.
But Androm was too far gone. He dropped the pistol and wrapped fingers of iron around Alexei's neck. As the old man choked and struggled, trying to fight against the vastly superior strength of Androm's battle-hardened body, Androm whispered,
I, Emperor, proclaim the fourth empire of man.
Alexei's neck snapped and his world ended. Androm's world had just begun. Yishilin. Scout ship, Monkey King. beyond the Andorran militarized zone.
Plan? Yes, Lieutenant.
Jilin turned from her perusal of the latest intelligence on the leadership of the council races. Knowledge was power in all things.
Nam?
The lieutenant's consternation was clear despite her professional tones.
I'm picking up hundreds of new signatures. It's the Reclamation Armada. They're beginning the assault. What?
Jilin exclaimed.
Let me see.
She shoved the lieutenant aside and peered at the screen. There they were, the entire armada deploying from the relay. Already there were flashes of light as the two forces sent out fighters to harry and harass the other. What on earth were they doing? This wasn't the plan. This wasn't the plan at all. Jilin crossed to the Holovid station and attempted to contact the board directly. Nobody answered on the first trial, which in itself was highly unusual. Panic coursed through her veins as Jilin fought through the potential ramifications. Why weren't they answering? What the hell had happened?
Come on, come on.
She muttered as she tapped the call button over and over. On the fifth try, she was answered. Androm Winchester's stony expression filled her vision as he glared at her.
Androm, what's going on? Why are you attacking?
There's been a change of plans. We'll need you to return to the carrier to be properly debriefed.
Androm's eyes flashed yellow and Jilin froze.
Androm, I'd like to be put through to the rest of the board.
That won't be possible.
Why not, Androm? What have you done?
Jilin, this is a battle. They have responsibilities to take care of.
Androm,
Jilin whispered.
what have you done?
Inside she was screaming. This wasn't Androm anymore. He was tainted. Odds are the entire board was either wiped out or tainted too. The nightmare would begin again.
Only what was necessary to protect humanity.
You monster!
Jilin cried, slamming her fists down on the console. The bridge around her was dead silent as they all looked on in amazement. They had never seen her lose control. Not once, but here she was, teary-eyed and trembling in rage and fear.
Do what you will, Jilin. It's already done.
Androm Winchester calmly replied, his voice unfeeling and unflinching in the face of this colossal betrayal. Jilin slammed the end call button down before collapsing into a chair with her face in her hands. Her crew, some 8 individuals, gathered around her, looking on in trepidation.
Lamb,
Asked Jilin's lieutenant, Chow.
what's happened? Androm Winchester
Jilin replied in a voice so dead that it should be buried.
has betrayed the board.
There was silence. Until Lieutenant Chow spoke again, his voice businesslike and confident.
What are your orders, Commander?
Jilin stood up, broken, but defiant.
We continue with our mission. We'll save the galaxy this time.